Hey guys, it's Sean from Tested. We are back today with a review of the Formlabs Form 3. It's their newest SLA resin printer, and we've been using it for about 2 months. So this is a pretty in-depth, long-term kind of review. Before we jump into it, I think we should review SLA printing, just for those of you who may not know. You have FDM printing, which is the plastic filament printing you typically see around home and schools and is probably the most common 3D printing that pops up. Have a spool of plastic filament that gets extruded through a hot nozzle and drawn onto the print bed. SLA or stereolithography printing works a little different. It is a liquid resin, which is getting cured and hardened by a UV light. So in this case, a laser, which is the same as their previous Form 2 and Form 1 Plus. Having said that, once you're done with the print, you typically have to wash it in alcohol to get off the extra resin. Sometimes there's a little post-curing that you have to do with a UV light or out in the sun, depending on the resin. And the print process itself generally is a platform that goes down into a liquid vat of resin. A laser or other UV light hits it through a optically clear tray bottom, hardens it. There's usually a peel process which breaks it loose from the bottom of the tank. So in the case of the Form 2, it would slide to the side, break it loose, lift up, the resin flows back in, and it repeats that until you're all done. So what they've done with the Form 3 is kind of a drastic departure from how SLA has been done before. They're calling it low force stereolithography. And that involves two mechanisms which are different than the two. The first is a tray. The resin tray has a flexible bottom, and combined with that is a light processing unit, the LPU, which actually moves the laser back and forth across the bottom of the tray. So it will tent up the bottom of that flexible tray, and basically as it moves past the printed part, it is doing a bit of a peel process as it goes. So it doesn't move the tray afterwards, that's it. It raises it up to let the resin flow back in, and it continues that until it's done. What that allows the printer to do is it puts far less strain on the print and the print supports. So, when you have these suspended from the tray, there's usually some kind of support mechanism which holds the print itself. So the low force stereolithography allows you to get finer surface finish and use less supports or finer point tips, which will break off easier, or a combination of the both. And in practice, it definitely worked. I got really, really nice prints out of it. And we'll go in a little more how the mechanism on this particular unit works after we talk about the rest of the specs. They've also lowered the laser spot size. It is an 85 micron laser spot versus the 140 micron spot size that was on the Form 2. So in theory, you should be able to get finer detail resolved with that laser. The wattage has remained the same between the two. It can handle and print a layer height going from 0.3 millimeters at the fattest to 0.025 millimeters at the thinnest. We printed most of our stuff at 0.1 millimeter or 0.05 millimeter, and I didn't feel the need to go beyond that for 0.025. You'd have to have something very, very detailed to do that. The build volume is roughly the same as the Form 2. It's 5.7 by 5.7 by 7.3 inches. So it's just shy of ½ an inch taller in the Z-axis than the 2, but otherwise they're identical. It uses the same print platform, in fact. It has a heated chamber. It has a hot air heated chamber, so it has a hot air blower versus the Form 2, which uses a heated tray. So now the entire chamber is going to be heated with a hot air blower, which I found it did heat up faster than the tray heater typically did. It has full touch screen that you can access all the maintenance and system information, print times. It will store a good many prints on the printer itself. It will show you a rendering of the model, and you can call those up and print without access to the internet or having this hooked up to a computer, which is nice. As far as connectivity goes, we have Wi-Fi, Ethernet, and USB. All worked fine for me. I had it hooked up for Wi-Fi for most of the time, and it was able to upload both firmware and prints without any problem. And that will then interface also with their dashboard system, which is their web interface, which as of right now, it basically lets you track prints, print times, failures, materials used, tray use, and down the line for the 3, it's going to have remote print capabilities. It is not implemented yet, so I didn't get to test that, but there is a beta option, a beta program that you can sign up for via the dashboard interface. You can also interface with it via the pre-form software, which is where you're going to set up the model and the support structures, and etc. So that's kind of like the general rundown of the Form 3. We'll get a little more in detail after we take a look at the prints, because why wait? So the prints were fantastic. I was really, really impressed with them. I basically got the print in gray, their standard gray resin, and in the clear. And the surface finish on these is definitely finer than I would get on the 2. You got less stepping on the fatter resolutions, on the fatter layer heights, and on the medium setting, most of these prints, I can't see the lines, which I was really impressed by. So we'll take a closer look at these as well. In particular, I found that the clear prints were even clearer than on the 2. The 2 would come out and they would be a little foggy no matter what layer height you used. With a little bit of sanding, polishing, you could get them fairly optically clear. With this is already well on its way. They are much clearer prints coming directly out of the printer than they were on the 2. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that because the low force technology is just not putting as much strain on the model or the supports, so it doesn't shift around by little, barely perceivable amounts, so that each of those layers stacks up cleaner, and it just makes it more likely to be optically clear. I printed a lens here from one of Formlabs' little camera kits at 0.025, and you can definitely see through it. And if you did a little polishing on this, or maybe a resin dip, you could definitely get it see-through. So very impressed with the prints. I had no real issues for most of the printing process. I had a few instances where I had a failed print, and failed prints on this are typically either it falls off the support structure, so it falls off these guys, or the whole base comes off of the platform. That tends to happen with smaller prints that don't have a very big footprint. I had 2 instances where the print did break off of the platform, stuck to the bottom of the tray, and I had to remove that. So on the Form 2, it has a soft layer on the very top of a glass bottom. So it's still fairly rigid. So you could take the putty knife that comes with the cleaning kit and just scrape along that and pop it off without too much trouble. The problem you run into with the 3 is that because it has a flexible bottom on the print tray, it makes it much harder to get those off. They've also reformulated the coating that's on the bottom, so prints tend to stick more, I found, than they did on the 2 when they fail like that. So I had some concerns that I was going to puncture through the bottom when I was scraping along that. So what they've done in this case is they've also upgraded the storage for the trays. They have what they call the lunch box. So it has the UV protective cover, and it has a fully enclosed case to keep them clean. But they also recommend putting the prints in here because it should be clean and gives you a firm bottom to clean failed prints. I found that I had better luck just putting on a pair of the nitrile gloves and using my fingernail to pick it off, and that worked fine and made me far less nervous than scraping the putty knife along the bottom. They are working on, specifically for the 3, light touch supports. This is also not implemented yet in Preform, the software. It will basically be a totally different geometry, a totally different way of generating the support structures, and they will basically just kind of break away without leaving much of a mark at all on the print. I suspect that they're going to be very much like the very lace-like lattice work structures that I've seen on higher-end resin printers. Since there's not as much force on them, you should be able to print on something like that without it breaking off. And I'm really curious to see how that works, because I had really good success with just lowering the point size and getting really clean prints right off the supports. So it'll be interesting to see how the light touch support compares to those. So let's talk about Also, orientation and cupping on prints. In the past with SLA printing, and particularly the Form 2, you were always encouraged to angle things on the print bed. So for example, we have the pumpkin monster here, and he has this very wide base. So generally you would not want to print him straight up and down like that, because it has this very large surface area that it would have to break loose and peel from the tray bottom every time. And that puts a lot of strain on the support structure, and you're much more likely for this to tear loose from the supports and fail the print. With the Form 3, I printed a lot of stuff just flat down like I normally would not, but because it's putting far less strain on there and it's kind of doing a peel process as it goes, I had no problems printing those. They came out well, they did not break off the support structures, and the surface finish was great. The other thing is cupping. So if you were printing, say, a cup upside down, so let's pretend this pumpkin head is a closed cup. If you're just starting this print and it is dipping down into the resin, and you just started to build these walls around here, when you dip that cup down in the resin, it's going to build up air pressure inside of that cup, and sometimes it can force its way out and blow a hole through the side of the print wall. So the preform software will generally try to warn you when it has a cupping situation where you can have a blowout. Once again, the way the low force stereolithography is working, I was able to print some cupped items that I would normally either put vent holes in to alleviate that pressure, or reorient so that it didn't have that cup on the print bed, and they printed fine as well. So your mileage may vary on that, but definitely the low force technology has helped with both the angle of the print and the cupping on prints. So also good news. I did run into a few other interesting issues other than the 2 failed prints that I had, which were completely my fault. On my Scuttlefish, which has been one of our go-to test prints on the form printers, I have typically printed it straight up and down like this, because orienting it this way, I was able to use very few supports, and there was very little cleanup, which was really great, especially if you're like gonna sell these or produce a whole bunch of them or anything like that. When I printed it this way on the 3, I got weird, what I called varicose veins. They were these weird tubular disruptions in the surface that looked like little veins. Other than that, the surface finish was absolutely great. I talked to Formlabs about it, and they're like, oh yeah, about that, we're looking into it. So it is a known issue that is somewhere within the software firmware, that they said certain curved objects, when oriented straight up and down on the bed, could exhibit these types of artifacts. So I saw it show up on the bottom of the Scuttlefish here, and I saw it show up on the very bottom of this lens, which also has that kind of curved surface. So that is something to be aware of, and something which I would expect to see resolved in a future software and or firmware update. What they had me do is tilt the model kind of like you typically would for one of these prints, and they completely disappeared. The surface finish was fantastic, but I had to use a lot more supports. So I hope that they get that one ironed out in the near future. We should also talk about print times. I've heard reports of those who have gotten the Form 3 in their hands that print times are longer than they were on the 2. And I found that that is true sometimes. What I want to do is talk about how this mechanism actually works, and then we'll talk about the print times, because it'll kind of make it clear once you understand how everything is working inside here. So one of the first things they did with the 3 is they made everything modular. So if any of you have ever had to clean the optics on the Form 2, it is a pain. You have to take the whole housing off. There's light and dirt baffles that you have to pull out of the way. There's 2 little galvo mirrors that are on motors that you have to clean. There's a main big mirror that you have to clean. There's an optical glass that you have to clean. And it's a really difficult process, especially without getting more dirt in there. So unless you have a clean room, the likelihood of getting some lint or dirt or something in there is very high. So cleaning the optics on the 2, you didn't have to do it often, but you did have to do it every once in a while, and it was not the easiest thing to deal with. So they approached the 3 in a more modular fashion, so that the light unit is an actual cartridge that you can home so that you can get to it. You can pull it out, unplug it, put in a new one, and you're good to go. So they've kind of like looked ahead to in-field user-friendly service in order to expedite repairs and service, which I think is a great way of doing things. The LPU, the light processing unit itself, is an interesting beast as well, because the original setup was basically the Form 2, as I said, the laser, which bounced off 2 mirrors onto a big mirror through the optical glass. A lot of glass to clean. The LPU basically has one long optical window, so there's not much to clean on it. It has a parabolic mirror inside that bounces the laser at an exact perpendicular angle to the print tray, so that you get really accurate printing all across the up and down of the tray. And then the cartridge itself is basically on a lead screw that then moves it across the tray, which is a very unusual way of doing things. Combined with the flexible tray, which is even more complicated than just a flexible bottom. First, it has a flexible soft bottom. Underneath that is then a stronger flexible film that rides on top of the LPU. So the LPU basically has these rollers, these metal rollers on either side of the glass that tent that film up, and then the film rolls on top of that, which it's to me is a crazy way of doing things, but it does work. The other mechanism involved with that is that there is rods on either side of the tray on the bottom. And I thought that those are rollers at first, but they're actually tensioning rods. So when you insert the tray into the printer, there's a tensioning mechanism that grabs that and pulls the film tight, so that it is nice and optically clear. There's no wrinkles or divots or anything like that. And it gives it a nice, smooth, rigid surface to roll against. My immediate thing as a film person is you have metal rollers running against a clear optical film on your printer. Is that not going to cause problems? Like, what if you get a piece of dirt in there? What if it grinds into the film? To me, that seemed like a real possibility. I talked to Formlabs about that, and they're like, obviously, yes, we have thought of that, and that is something we are aware of that could happen. That's part of the reason why they've moved to the lunchbox system to store the trays to keep that film perfectly clean. You will, I think, occasionally have to dust off the LPU unit. It does park underneath the top edge of the printer, but you can bring it out so it's exposed to dust it off if need be. And I could see it happening where a piece of dirt got in that roller and caused a problem. I printed with this for 2 months. I did not have any of those problems. I did not get a speck of dirt from that mechanism on the window or on the film. However, I did observe that on the edges of the film, if you look under the tray, you could see very faint lines of dust. You could also see a few little bits of dust accumulating on the metal rollers that are on either side of that optical window. And basically, I think what that is basically just wear and tear of those rollers going across that film. But it always successfully pushed everything to the sides of the film. I never had anything show up on the bottom of the tray. So they've thought this through. I'm interested to see how this goes in the long run. Unlike the very early Form 2 trays, which would like start to cloud up after about 1 or 2 cartridges of resin, these have a somewhat indefinite lifespan with standard resin. So if you're using like the black, white, gray, the pretty standard resins, these will last much longer than they normally would on the Form 2, because they have a different coating formulation, the way the whole mechanism with the low force stereolithography works, they will last longer. So you may see a tray run out on tensioning before you see it optically run out. It depends how often you take them in and out, because it only tensions when you put the tray in. So I'll be interested to see how that shakes out in the long run. But my concerns as a film person, at least in the 2 months I had it, proved to be unfounded. Let's move on to the print times. So the reason I wanted to delay that until after we talked about the print mechanism is that the way this works can affect print time. So I printed Pumpkin Monster here, which with the head and everything took up most of the print bed. It took 23.5 hours at the 0.05 layer height on the Form 3. I ran it through the preform software, and the time estimate for the Form 2 was 3.5 hours less. That's a huge difference. So I was like, okay, what's going on here? So I ran some more tests. So I did another model, which took only 15 minutes longer on the Form 3 versus the Form 2. So not as drastic, but still a difference. Then I ran a friend of Tested, Dave Goldberg. This is his cockpit model. I ran this on both of them exact same time. So I started to suspect that what was going on was that because the laser has a mechanical aspect to it, it's not just bouncing light off of optics, it's actually moving the laser. I thought that might have something to do with it. So something that would take up more of the print bed, where that cartridge has to move more across the tray, would take more time on the 3 than on the 2. And I did confirm that. That's exactly what's happening. I confirmed it with Formlabs. So for example, I did an experiment where I took 4 cubes, I put them at the corners of the print tray, and then I did the same 4 cubes, but in a line along one side. It took 35 minutes longer to print it at the 4 corners than it did in that straight line. On the Form 2, you really wouldn't see much difference if you scattered them like that in print times. So that's kind of interesting. And what they also told me was that the Form 3 is actually capable of printing faster than the 2. It's just not there yet. And this has been kind of popping up a lot during the reviewing process. It's like, not quite there yet, not implemented yet. We're working on it. So like the veining that we had in some of the prints, some of the engineering resins that Formlabs has do not currently work in the 3, so be aware of that if you're hot to trot to get it like right away. I also found things like the preform software seems to be running slower than I was used to, which is also confirmed because a lot of things aren't optimized yet for the 3, and like things like the light touch supports aren't there yet. So my suspicion is that somewhere along the lines of the development of the 3, some department, maybe marketing or something, I don't know, was like, we have to make this announcement at this conference that's coming up or by this date. And I think that they rushed to get this like mechanically and solid and get the hardware done, but they announced before everything was truly finished. So that's just something to be aware of if you are looking to get it right away. There's a lead time right now of about 2 months. So they're talking about releasing in December. We're shooting this at the end of October. There's a lead time of 2 months on these right now. And I suspect that by that time, you're going to see a lot of things implemented and improvements over what I had. I have faith in Formlabs. It is a good printer. I got excellent prints off of it. The Form 2 was an excellent printer and has been for me. So I have faith in them that everything will get fixed and implemented. It's just going to take some time. And as far as like, would I get this printer? Yes, I'm going to be sad to see this go. I still have the Form 2. The Form 2 is still fantastic. I will be sad to see this one go because the prints were great. Pricing on this is $3,500, which gets you the printer and the basic wash station, which is 2 containers to put your alcohol in for post-washing. They have an upgrade for that, which is $5,000, which is the printer, the wash machine, the cure machine, and the pro service plan. So if you're doing big production work and you need faster results and more support, that may be the way to go for you. They have also discontinued the Form 2, although they still are selling some that have been refurbished with a 1-year warranty for $28.50. So it might be a good time to pick up a Form 2. It's still a great printer. They have committed to supporting the Form 2 through 2023 for parts, service, and consumables. So that's a good length of time, and it may even extend past that. So this has been the Formlabs Form 3 using low force stereolithography, or rethinking of how SLA is handled. We recommended with reservations, just be aware of what you're getting into, since I think it was released a little bit before it was fully done, but I have faith that Formlabs will come through in the end and finish things up. This has been Sean for Test It. Tune in next time. See you later.